Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals.
I want to really next unpack, what's robbing us of happiness, because we alluded to this social media and, what kids are doing. Studies have shown since the advent 2012 or so. I mean, even though the iPhone was invented in like 2007, it's really 2012. And there are reasons for that, where this, the science is showing that kids are becoming more anxious, less happy. We'll talk about that. But if you had a toolbox, and in that toolbox, you had, the ability to practice the daily habits like gratitude and mindfulness, or there was a little, chip that represented exercise, and maybe there was another thing that was, the best nutrition. If you could only choose one, and you were headed toward a desert island with this toolbox, you can only bring one in that toolbox. Is there one? Is there like the Dr. Mandich favorite, like this is a non-negotiable, regular routine habit everyone has to do in order to optimize or see that level of happiness increase?
So no, because we're all different, right? And what works for me, it's the same as nutrition, right? What works for you versus me, because our bodies are different, our genetics are different, we need different things. And it even gets more complicated with happiness, because if you think about what made you happy when you were 16 versus now versus when you're 100, it changes, right? So it's not like we sort of figure out, oh, these 10 things make me happy. It's this constant iterative, evolving process of self-discovery and learning and changing and growing. And it's sort of like a book. Like, have you read a book that like changed your life, and then you go back and you read it and you're like, really? Like years later?
Totally. Different insights, different times, different levels.
Exactly. And so
wisdom. With wisdom, I believe you're probably a little bit more likely to be happy again with the little things.
And so I think that it's not like a one thing. If I had to, I would put my bet down on exercise, because there's so many physiological benefits, and because like our physical health also impacts our mood, right? And so when we're fit, especially as we age, when we're fitter and we're stronger and we're healthier, that impacts our happiness. So if I had to pick one thing, I would pick physical activity, movement, exercise. But I think that the other thing is, so often we also think like, what else do I have to do? Do I have to do to be happy? And another piece of the conversation is sometimes it's not about doing more. It's about stopping doing something, reducing the frequency.
Which I totally want to get into. It's like, there's so many things that we have to discontinue that are robbing us. But and just before we do, and by the way, I know that I asked you this question earlier, and I know that it was like, dum, I've already answered, and there isn't one thing. So I held the proverbial gun to your head, and you chose exercise. I got to say, if that same gun was held to my head, I'd probably choose the same thing. But what we want to drive home for our listeners is that the practice, which includes a number of different things, being grateful, mindfulness, maybe meditation. We'll talk about sleep, I'm sure, very shortly. Good nutrition, et cetera. It's the package. You're partnering up, or you've partnered up with UC Berkeley on a happiness program. And so this is a perfect time, to ask you, what insights or tools does that program offer folks toward, doing exactly what we're talking about, having a happier, more fulfilled life?
Yeah. So actually, this is work that I published with my PhD. So Berkeley has a 10-week online course. There's a lot of online happiness courses now. And if I'm making recommendations to people, I would recommend choosing ones that are really evidence-based. So Laurie Santos has a great one at Yale. Berkeley has a great one. The one that I worked with Berkeley was a 10-week program. And basically, it taught a lot about, what is the science of happiness and what skills are highly correlated with happiness. So learn about social connection and mindfulness, and things like that. And so the challenges, though, with a 10-week course, especially one that's free, is that attrition, dropout, can be really high. So then it became, okay, well, what are sort of the key, like if we had to distill it down into 4 weeks, which is what we looked at, like what are out of the 10 weeks, what are the 4 weeks of content that's sort of most important? And I think with happiness, a lot of it is the practice of it, but it's also about equipping yourself with the knowledge to know that you can do something. And like a lot of times when I go and, I'll speak or talk about something like gratitude, for example, right? We all sort of generally know what gratitude is. There's a whole section now at the bookstore with gratitude, like journals, right? But a lot of times people say to me like, yeah, you know what? Like I kind of already knew that, but it's nice to see some data behind it, right? It's nice to know that it doesn't just feel good, that it's really supported with data. And so when we think about some of those things, right? So gratitude is a big one. But one thing I think that is important to note on that is that in like a good, better, best situation, thinking about things that you're grateful for is good. But in a best case scenario, you're actually writing them down, whether that be physically with a journal or using a notes section on your phone or, a word processing app or whatever. Actually writing it down can increase the impact of it in terms of how profound it is. But the other thing is that we are creatures of habit as humans. And so you can't just every day write down, I'm grateful for my dog Jocko. The effect starts to taper off. So whether it be that I look at different features of Jocko or different questions that I ask, we really need to be with whatever practice, even with exercise, right? It's we like novelty. We like new things. We like things different ways. And so whatever practice that we do, sort of finding a way to incorporate variety and novelty. If you're really wanting to get the most out of any sort of behavior, thinking about that is a really important piece of the conversation that I don't think people talk about as much.
Yeah. And the burning question is to understand baseline, like where are we all at? Is there a simple way to determine the likelihood that, a course or a program like this would be beneficial? I mean, I'm sure it benefits everybody, but is there a way to self-assess our current level of happiness? And how can that sort of guide where to go next? If there's an assay or an inventory or, a DSM schedule line of questions, is there such a thing that you would say is the best way to know how happy you are and then to be able to retake it later and see that there's benefit?
Yeah. So in happiness research, we'll often use tools like the Oxford Happiness Inventory, which is created at Oxford, or the Subjective Happiness Scale. It's a 4-item questionnaire. So some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. You answer the questions, some of them they're reverse scored, right? So they ask the positive and the negative side, the flip side of it. And at the end of it, you get a number. And if I tell you you're a 4.8, that means nothing to you. You don't know what that means, right? But with happiness,
sounds like I failed.
Not on a 7-point scale, right? Because that's so I think that having some sort of measurement, like I remember one of my stats professors in undergrad used to say, what gets measured gets managed.
Right.
And so I don't think the key thing to focus on when you do that, and there are tons of tools online you can go and do for free, but even just sitting there and thinking on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I? Like 1, I'm the least happy I've ever been in my life. 10, I'm the most. What we do know from research is that as humans, we're pretty good at self-reporting our own happiness. So we're actually pretty good at figuring out if we feel happy or not. What's interesting is what we're not as good at is figuring out what it is that makes us happy. So we often think it's the big shiny moments, it's the trips. But there's this concept, it's called affective forecasting, like AFF, affective forecasting. You're forecasting your affect. You're predicting how you're going to feel. And what we know is, say you get that car, the job, whatever it is, it doesn't bring you as much happiness as you anticipated that it would, and it doesn't last for as long as you think that it would. So we're not as good at predicting how we're going to feel in the future and the intensity as well as the duration. But what we are good at is self-reporting our own happiness. And so where we are right now, I think is one, it's not a judgment activity, right? So it's an awareness activity. And then the key is if you start to do things that make you happy, it's that you just want to see an increase over time, right? So if you go from a 4 to a 4.5 or a 4.5 to a 5, like those numbers don't matter as much. It's that we're trending in the right direction, right? We're increasing our happiness. And I do think that if people want to figure out, okay, well, what can I do to increase my happiness? There's this exercise that I'll encourage people to do sometimes. I call it happy hunting. And all it is you are sort of like a scientist in your own life. You're collecting data on yourself. So it's as simple as like taking out a piece of paper or using like a note section in your phone and having 2 columns or 2 different sections, more happy, less happy. And as you go through your day, you do something. I wake up and I meditate, let's say. So I check in after I meditate. Did I feel more happy or less happy? I felt more happy usually. So that goes in that column. And at the end of the day, you've got 2 lists. And if you're like me and you like a really rich data set, do it for a couple days, weekend day, weekdays, whatever it is, you'll look at that list. And there are going to be things on that list in the less happy that have to be there, right? We're adults. We need to do laundry. We need to clean up things that we don't like. There are certain things as a functioning adult we have to do, but also maybe we can do it less frequently. Or, something like, I don't like grocery shopping. And for like $5 now, you can get your groceries delivered, right? So there's certain things that we can outsource. And then in the more happy column,
win.
right, 100%, is maybe there's things that you have in the more happy that you could do more often because you didn't even realize. And so having that awareness, or what are the things that I do that I enjoy or that I don't enjoy, can start to give us back. The other thing is it gives us back some autonomy. So autonomy is this fancy research word for like, there are things in our life that we can't control, and there are things in our life that we can control. And choosing to give more of our focus, our energy, our resources to the things that we can control is really powerful. And so we look at that list, and there's probably some things on there that we can control in terms of reducing the frequency. We talked about like stopping doing things or doing things more often or more times per day or more times per week. And autonomy is actually more of a predictor of our happiness than how much money we have, how popular we are, how good our sex life is. So above all those, and how good looking we are. Did I say that? So above all those things, this idea of what can control is such a big piece of it. And so starting to learn for ourselves what are those things is a great opportunity to start to bring back some awareness around it to then start changing behavior.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like, again, with wisdom and adulthood came the autonomy, as you described it, and wisdom to be able to know and choose best circumstances in which to, in order, relinquish or surrender. Where, I suppose my personality was always to fight through and stiff upper lip certain situations, which didn't make me very happy. Yeah. But knowing and using opportunity to surrender in times or experiences is certainly something. Just the knowledge that I know that I can make that decision, and usually it not only doesn't hurt me, it benefits outcome. Mm-hmm. I'm happier for it. And so that I believe that that's what the research shows, and I've experienced that myself. Knowing that we're in control has to, and that comes back full circle, I suppose, to that anthropological argument, which is basis of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for, at least as it pertained to our ancestors. Because we feel, and this is a perfect segue, by the way, into what's robbing us of happiness. We feel that there is a need to be in social media in a big way. There is a need to have stuff. There's a need to accumulate money, none of which helps us. None of which, at the end of it, we know this from the research done on lottery winners, right? It's that dopamine hit on getting, the best numbers, but in the end of it, it's not a better life. So in your opinion, what are these top happiness thieves, essentially, that we're facing today?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a couple big ones. So when I was doing my PhD, I was also teaching in the Faculty of Health Science at Western. And I taught the first year course. It's called Personal Determinants of Health. So it's like a super class, like 500 students. And it was sort of an overview of like general health things, health policy, all this sort of stuff, physical activity, nutrition. But then I also wanted to teach a course on social media, because this was sort of early social media days. But what we were seeing is that students, especially in health science, are going on to often be healthcare practitioners. So they're sharing information online and consuming information online, right? And social media being a big platform with which to disseminate and communicate that information. And so I remember the first time I taught the course, the first day, at the beginning of my lecture, one of the first slides I had, I put up this picture of Spider-Man, with the wisdom of Spider-Man, with the quote that Peter Parker got from his uncle in the movie. And he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And so like people tend to be like, oh, social media is the problem. Technology is the problem. But the conversation is much more nuanced than that, right? It can be a great thing. We talk about like the number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness is social connection. And technology and social media in certain circumstances can be a really powerful way to connect, whether it be, I don't really go on Facebook that much, but say I go on, like a lot of the people on my Facebook are like my friends from high school. and I'll see like, oh, they had a baby or they did this, right? You can stay connected with people that you wouldn't otherwise, or people that have niche hobbies that could find people all over the world. So there is inherently, and it can be a good thing, right? Technology is a useful servant, but it's a dangerous master, is how I think about it, right? And so, but overall, and especially with this younger generation, so I've been in the data a lot this year, or I guess last year, because we're at the beginning of 2025. Every year, the UN has a university. It's called the University for Peace, and it's in Costa Rica. And every year in March, they host what's called the Gross Global Happiness Summit. So it's a big international conference at the UN's university. And last year, I spoke about Gen Z and mental health. And you look across graphs, whether it's like suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, anxiety, depression, and the lines are sort of, pretty stable, and then up every single time. And a big player in that is technology and social media. But it's not one of those things where it's like you throw the wine out with the cork, right? I used to say baby with the bathwater, but I'm like, why are we throwing out babies? So now I say wine with the cork.
I like it. I'm stealing that.
Same with two birds with one stone. I'm always like, why are we killing birds? So now I say two coconuts with one rock. So nice. Total aside. Anyway, but it's one of these things where and you talked about like comparison earlier, right? We often, when we're on social media, and we tend to compare up, not down, right? We look at people that don't have more than we have, or things like that, as opposed to the other way. It is a major factor. And for parents that are listening right now, I really want to encourage you to read John Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. So Jonathan Haidt is at Stern. And one of the things that I think
he's the researcher that talks a lot about this recent epidemic of social media impact on anxiety in young women, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And what I think is incredibly exceptional, one, the work is amazing. And I got really into his data as I was presenting for my talk. So it's solid back end. But he wrote the happiness hypothesis. He's been a really well-respected researcher for a long time. But he also has children. And what sparked this whole journey for him into this is trying to figure out how to create a world where children can actually play and thrive. And so, it's really coming from a passionate place that's personal as well. But he really talks about this idea that like people, loss of play is a really big thing. Like I used to use this meme and I can't use it anymore. You will remember this. Do you remember when you were a child and you go in your neighborhood and you'd all be on your bikes and then you'd all go to someone's house and then all the bikes would be out front, right?
Sure.
So I had this meme and it said...
That was literally my life is an 80s Instagram meme account as a childhood life anyway. Lights going off is my curfew. Drinking from a hose and front lawn of some random neighbor's houses, all that stuff.
Yeah. And the meme said something like, before social media, this is where we knew where our friends were. Right. And I had to stop using it because Gen Z doesn't get that anymore. No. Because that's not, they've lost this play. Like, and especially we see with these helicopter parents, right, that want to, just put their children in a bubble and protect them, but we're actually not protecting them at all. We've lost that exploration, the trial, that sort of play. And then the other thing is that social media is a curated, often filtered, edited snapshot of a certain point of people's lives. And
not real.
It's not real. And it's also not a representation of, we live our life 24/7. We're participating in our own life. So we see every single piece of it. But if I just see a picture of someone's vacation that they posted, I don't know that the child was having a meltdown before and their flight was delayed. And I just see this beautiful picture of this family by the poolside smiling, right? So we're comparing a snapshot to our whole life, to our front and our backstory, right? And it's really scary. And like we sort of have touched about it, but another big problem is that children are going on these devices when it's bedtime in their rooms and it's affecting their sleep.
Right. Sleep's lack thereof anyway, is another thief or robber of happiness, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to have a happy day. And this plays often a little bit of the biochemistry of things. If you haven't had it's not just the hours you clock on the pillow. It's a deep, restful, rejuvenative sleep hygiene invoked sleep, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we all know what it's like when you wake up and you've had an amazing night's sleep and like, it's like the birds are chirping and everything's so nice and you're in a great mood, right? We've all had nights where like, there was a night last week or the week before, in my condo building where for some reason the fire alarm kept going off for like hours. It would stop and then it would go. And the amount of grumpiness in all my neighbors the next day, even like when you're waiting to pick up a package or whatever, like you see, and I felt it too. Like I was just noticing I was more on edge. I was shorter. I was just like grumpier, right? Because it really does affect our mood. And
some people
not
more
only
than
that,
others, you know. Again, that's one of the things we take pride in at the DNA company is measuring and understanding through genomic pathways one's circadian rhythm,
yes,
predispositions to how their brains uptake certain neurotransmitters that are important for sleep, even what the brain is doing to eliminate toxins at night. Everyone does it at a different speed, different levels of capacities, and you can improve it. Quality, duration, et cetera, with genomic insights. So best sleep informed by genomics. But the analogy I'd hazard is because, as you and I both agree, among so many other things, exercise is key to just upregulating the feel-good hormones and feeling more likely to be happy. But the warm-up is so important. Just 5 minutes of anything, we're meant to push, pull, jump, squat, lift, walk, and run. But before doing that, just moving the body around, that workout's going to be more effective. That is sleep for my next day. If you don't sleep, your day, you're just setting the stage. It's like you missed the warm up.
I love
just not
that. Yeah.
you're not in a position to experience or even receive moments that would otherwise trigger happiness, is my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of happiness is in the moments between the moments, right? It's in the day-to-day things. And when we're tired and we're not paying attention and we're not present, right? Because we're just a zombie that day, then we miss a lot of that, right? Like Jocko's over here, he's being all cute. He wants his dinner, but it's not dinner time yet. He's sitting by his bowl. But like, if I was grumpy, I'd be like when you're in a good mood, you tend to notice small things like that are cute. But when you're tired, you're so low on capacity that you miss a lot of those little things that are really, that bring you into the moment, that sort of have that mindfulness element, because that's something that really does matter in terms of our happiness.
Absolutely. And also as we sort of tie up and come to a close here, I would be remiss if we didn't at least touch on, again, without getting into prescriptive changes. Always talk to your doctor or pharmacist before starting anything, and non-diagnostic. We're not drawing from the DSM here, but we're seeing this dramatic rise in antidepressant prescriptions. I mean, since the late 90s, really. And these medications intersect, in my opinion, for many, on the, I wouldn't even call it the pursuit of happiness or happiness of pursuit and what we've been toying with, the either or, but the idea that these are real numbing agents that are amazing for some people. They're heroic, incredible, life-changing in the short order, but they were never studied for long term. But what I'm getting at is, because I've heard you also say this, being sad and or even depressed, clinically or otherwise, is not the opposite of being happy. And therefore, happiness is also not the opposite of being sad. A, what do you even mean by that? And B, how do some people that are on SSRIs, because a huge percentage of the population are taking these medications, often rightfully so, how might they also get an uptick? Because part of what this drug is trying to do is many of them are trying to not suppress happiness, but create monotony or create or almost a dulled out state. So I know that's a big question, but first, what does the spectrum mean, or lack thereof? Like, there's no opposite of happiness being sad. And then maybe what can this population do to, maybe it's not even different than the rest of us in our strive for happiness?
Yeah, great questions. So in terms of the happiness sadness thing, like when I first got into it, I was telling you earlier, I had to like kind of unlearn and relearn things. I kind of thought that there's a continuum, and on one end is sadness and on one end is happiness, right? And I wanted to go to the happiness end. But what I learned is they're actually two separate continuums. So sadness is a continuum with more really sad on one side and not sad at all on the other. And happiness is a continuum with really, really happy and not happy at all. And the opposite of happiness is not sadness. It's not the opposite end of the continuum. The opposite of happiness is apathy. It's not caring at all. And to sort of come bring the antidepressant piece into the conversation, the way I think about it is, say you want to build a house, right? You need all the things to build a house. You need doors and you need windows and bricks and cement and all the things. And so if someone's body is not producing the precursor to serotonin or the receptor that's communicating with dopamine, no amount of gratitude is going to get that to work. It's like if your house doesn't have doors, right? There's no amount of like manifesting or wishing or like practicing gratitude and being connected that's going to bring a door. So there is definitely a time and a place, and that's a conversation to have with mental health professionals. And also at the same time,
when you say a time and place, you mean for medication?
Yes, like
even the
biochemistry is, but the big but here is that we live in a world where a lot of the healthcare system wants to write out a prescription as step one.
Right.
And so my question is, in addition to that, is how often are you moving your body? What is your sleep like? What is your nutrition like? What are you listening to? How much time are you spending on social media? Because a lot of times when we look and people actually go to those things, it's the behavioral piece. It's not a structural problem with something, right? But we live in a world where people want a happiness pill, right? They don't want to actually have to work at it. And the reality is that that's not how it works, right? And so that's an important thing to consider too. It's like, so are you like taking something, but are you also moving your body? Are you sleeping well at night? Are you eating healthy food? Are you not consuming too much alcohol or cannabis or whatever it is? That's a huge piece of the conversation that often is not had. And yet, before reaching for, there is a time and a place, but I would say before reaching for that, let's have that conversation first. And
I have to interject on that exact point and just encourage folks that are entertaining once they've, gone through the motions of trying everything first and even concomitantly or together with, is pharmacogenomics. So, at the DNA company, thednacompany.com, there's an incredible test. We look at over 200 different prescription drugs. One of the biggest areas of concern is the genome that most of us have, the human race, vis-a-vis the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, or even SNRIs, classifications of antidepressants. You really got to know your DNA to know which of these drugs is going to work best for you. It's called the pharmacogenomics panel. I encourage everyone to look into this because if a drug is going to help you, you want the one that's suited to your personal instruction manual, because going through the motions of trial and error is the worst pain of all. And often, ultimately, many of these drugs actually cause the very side effects that we're looking to prevent, which is inclusive, unfortunately, of suicide. So this is just such a great way in which to further personalize the approach. There's a lot of research out there, the World Happiness Report. One of the things, by the way, that struck me most about that is Nordic countries. I mean, they consistently rank the highest because of that strong social support and work-life balance we talked about. But they live in such doldrums like north, cold, dark, which, by the way, we study also at the DNA company, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, such an interesting thing that's related to, as you know, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis in the brain and neurons coming together, et cetera. Really cool thing. But they have a 1.5 sauna per capita in Finland, Denmark. And so here's what the research shows, by the way, if you don't already know this, but for our listeners, going in a sauna, the extreme heat is going to upregulate BDNF in the brain, just like exercise, just like, by the way, vitamin D. So there is some degree of suggestion that in these countries, besides their genetic aptitudes, their levels of sauna taking is contributing to their happiness, and of course there's the grant study and there's the Blue Zones project we alluded to a little bit. the hedonic adaptation study, since the 70s, positive psychology movement. You talked about that, the Mappiness Project, the Witch-All studies, so much that if we have really curious listeners, and of course the Happiness Project, right? Gretchen Rubin, as of, I believe, 2010. But anyway, where would you guide? There's so much literature online, besides, of course, your research. Where would you guide folks to learn more about this topic?
Yeah. I love this question. So we'll go in a couple camps because, people are different. So we're on a podcast. So let's start there, right? There's some really great podcasts. Sure. Berkeley, I think it's called The Science of Happiness, actually. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. But it could be, but it's, if you Google that one, Dacher Keltner does that one a lot. He's amazing. He's done a ton of really great work in a lot of different spaces, but his most recent book, which we didn't touch on today, is Awe, like AWE. But he has a lot of great guests on. They cover a lot of content. Laurie Santos, that I had mentioned, who's at Yale, they do the Happiness Lab.
Right.
And so I tend to like to listen to more research-based happiness podcasts, just to sort of really ground things in science. So those are some podcasts that I really like.
Good point.
In terms of books, so Dr. Robert Waldinger, who's the current lead author of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest running longitudinal study on happiness, had a book come out last year called The Good Life. And I think that's an incredible book. It shares all the lessons that they've learned from the world's longest happiness study. That's a really great book. And it's an oldie but a goodie, but a lot of our happiness comes down to learning about our emotions and our feelings and getting in touch with that. And Dr. Susan David's work in this space is incredible. Her book, Emotional Agility, is it's a rock star book. She is an incredible communicator, scientist, researcher, author, and I really love her book for sort of learning to tap into our emotions. So that's a really great one. There's some amazing TED Talks for people that like to watch TED Talks. Dan Gilbert, who's at Harvard, has a really great TED Talk that is incredible to check out. And I just think that it's finding what works for you in the different mediums that you like. But those are all sort of if we look at the big hubs of where to find things, they're Berkeley in particular. They have this place there called the Greater Good Science Center, and they do a ton of incredible work. And I also will give a plug for Inside Out and Inside Out 2, the movies.
Love those.
Have you seen them?
Oh, yeah. And, some of the oldie but goodies that we, can't forget that kind of helped along the way make this a little bit more mainstream, which was, Down the Rabbit Hole and The Secret, I mean, that series there to describe, and actually the illustrations within, I have a feeling, that some of the animations that you're referring to got some of the original ideation from. But Down the Rabbit Hole and What the Bleep Do We Know and The Secret, I mean, that's a trifecta that if you haven't seen it and you're looking toward upregulating the chemistry and biochemistry of happiness, to go there. And by the way, the Berkeley podcast, you were right, is the Science of Happiness podcast. And they also do the Greater Good Talks, the Happiness Lab, and the Happiness Unpacked Insights from Berkeley. I'm a fan of quotes, and I just got to say, in context of this, and by the way, all this will be in the notes, folks, so every reference and every bit of information Dr. Mandich just gave you, you can go back to the podcast notes for. But Aristotle, he said, and echoes exactly what we're talking about, happiness depends on ourselves. Mm-hmm. Marcus Aurelius said, the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts.
Yep.
That's a really important one. Dalai Lama, you've got these rote, I know. Happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions. And I love what Gandhi said, which is, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. And there's so many others. But one of my favorites is actually what is on the front cover, front page of your own website, which is, there is no secret to happiness, but there is a science to it. Mm-hmm. I love that. And there is. And we talked about it. And I figured one of the best ways we could end off is, if you're willing, to have a quick minute, real fun with a rapid fire. This is true and false. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. We've talked all about them, but you're just going to go true or false. And then if you feel compelled, a quick second on why.
Yeah. Can I add 2 more quotes before?
Yeah, please.
Thich Nhat Hanh, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
Love it.
And Dr. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, incredible book. He says that happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue, like E-N-S-U-E, ensue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, rapid fire.
That's a game changer, that book. Okay, yeah. So, no, thank you so much. True or false? Okay. Happiness is entirely genetic.
False.
True or false? You can buy happiness if you have enough money.
False with a caveat.
I love to hear it. Okay, tell us how. So, becoming a millionaire.
There's a concept in research called time affluence.
Yep.
It's not about being a millionaire, but if you can spend your money to buy back time, that can bring you happiness. So, for example, I talked about ordering groceries, right? So now you've saved yourself a half an hour by paying the $5 to have it delivered. And so when you can spend money to buy a limited resource such as time back, that can actually, but it's not a certain dollar amount. It's about doing it wisely, but that can bring you happiness.
Oh, I love that you explained that, because I think too many of us are too quick to immediately assume that that's an absolute false. So thank you. Social media makes people happier.
Net false.
Net. Happiness is more about the journey than the destination.
True.
I don't know how many more times we can emphasize that. Eating chocolate boosts happiness.
True. For me. But not you. I mean, if you're allergic, maybe not. But
yeah, I agree. Well, good.
And depends how much and what kind. But yes.
Right. Oh, let's talk about the 90% healthy, low sugar.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Moderate portions.
There's some correlation. There's some interesting research around that. How about spending time in nature? Scientifically shown. Right. Apparently, and this is a little bit in the weeds, and excuse the pun on that, increasing serotonin through negative ion exposure, which is essentially, I think, what you're getting in part by walking in nature. So we should all do more of that. The Japanese have this, right? They call this Shinrin Yoku, or forest bathing, literally immersing within forest to feel happier. Meditation is one of the best ways to train your brain for happiness.
Yeah, true. Can be.
Lack of sleep has no impact on happiness. Helping others is one of the fastest ways to feel happier.
True.
And last but not least, happiness is the journey or the practice, not the destination.
True. And I have this picture on my fridge at home. I did a talk during the pandemic at Lakehead University, which is a university here in Canada. And I talked about how happiness is not a destination, like we talked about today. And the professor that had invited me, she said, Gillian, when you were talking, it reminds me of this picture that I have on my fridge at home. And so she sent it to me. And one last book recommendation. It's from a book called Big Panda, Tiny Dragon. It's a children's book based in Buddhist philosophy. And the picture that she sent me that I now have, it's got a big panda with a tiny dragon sitting on it. And the caption says, which is more important, asked Big Panda, the journey or the destination? And then it says, the company, said Tiny Dragon. Because it's not where we're going, it's who we're going there with, right? And to, spend this time together or with you listening, right? That's a big piece of it. That's where the happiness is. It's in the going and who we're going there with.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with that. So we can't go, especially because he's right behind you, without getting at least, does he mind being picked up? Or is he kind of adverse?
Come here. No, he'll come. Come here. Come.
Everyone's got to see him. Like, all the animal lovers who have joined us today are just like, wait a second, let's get a front, and there he is. And apparently we were good enough to not have him snore the whole time. Apparently we were entertaining enough not to have him snore the entire time. So thanks, buddy.
Say hi, everybody. He's giving pet therapy to everyone watching.
That's
Say
so cute.
hello.
I was just saying, apparently we weren't boring enough to have him snore the entire time.
He did snore sometime. I took away his bone here, which because he plays so much that he falls asleep mid play with the bone in his mouth, and then it props up his mouth, and then he's super loud. So I had to take away his bone.
Oh
right?
my God. He's adorable. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Happiness isn't something we wait for. It's something we work on, we build, and we experience every day. Thank you so much, Dr. Gillian Mandich, for sharing her incredible insights. Let's all get out there and start creating our happiness. Until next time, stay healthy, stay curious, and stay happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Say thank you, Jocko.